He left me while I was in labor for my best friend. But what he didn't know was that I was worth $300 million. That's the kind of betrayal you never forget. I remember gripping the hospital bed, fighting through the pain of contractions only to discover he had slipped away straight into the arms of the woman I trusted most. But what they never saw coming was the secret I had been carrying, the one that would turn their smug laughter into silence. And this is how it all unfolded. When I first met him, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. It sounds so naive now, but in that moment, I was convinced fate had finally given me the love story I had been waiting for. He had that smile, the kind that melted away your defenses, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt chosen, special, desired in a way that made the rest of the world blur into background noise. Our first date played out like a scene from a movie. He pulled out my chair with old-fashioned charm, leaned forward when I spoke, hung on to every word like my thoughts were treasures only he could uncover. At the end of the night, he kissed me softly, just enough to leave me trembling, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." And I believed him. With all my heart, I believed him. Back then, everything felt like magic. Flowers appeared at my doorstep just because. Surprise weekend getaways turned ordinary Fridays into unforgettable escapes. And the little notso, the notes, tucked inside my purse, slipped under my pillow, scribbled on napkins at Diner Sichuan, declaring how much he loved me, how much he needed me, how he couldn't imagine a future without me. Those words wrapped around me like a blanket, shielding me from doubt, from fear, from reality. He painted our future with strokes so bright that I couldn't see the shadows behind them. Marriage, children, a house filled with laughter. He talked about growing old together, about rocking chairs on a porch somewhere, about love that would never fade. I clung to every word like gospel. After years of disappointment, years of broken promises, here was a man who seemed to want it all with me. And I wanted to believe in fairy tales. I wanted to believe in forever. But love doesn't hide behind perfection. Love is messy, imperfect, sometimes even uncomfortable. And what I had with him, it was too perfect, too rehearsed, a play performed so well that I didn't notice the stage lights flickering. The little cracks appeared first, small things, barely noticeable unless you looked closely. The way he made jokes at my expense in front of his friends, delivered with a laugh so light that everyone thought he was just teasing. And I laughed too, even when something inside me winced, or the way his compliments carried a sharp edge like when he'd say, "You look beautiful tonight, finally put some effort in." I laughed that off too. I told myself it was harmless, that he didn't mean it. After all, he loved me, didn't he? But the cracks widened. His care, once flattering, turned heavy like chains draped in silk. He wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was talking to, what I was doing. At first, I mistook it for devotion, as if he just loved me so much he couldn't bear to let me go. But then came the coldness, the sudden shift in his voice if I didn't answer quickly enough, the sharpness in his jaw when I questioned him even gently. He didn't shout, didn't hit, didn't leave visible scars. No, his control was quieter, more dangerous. Emotional bruises don't leave marks, but they ache just the same. I should have seen the truth. I should have admitted to myself that something was wrong. But instead, I stayed. I stayed because I loved Highmore, at least the version of him I thought was real. I stayed because walking away felt like giving up on the dream he had built for us, the dream I wanted so desperately to believe in. I stayed because the world saw us as perfect, and I didn't have the courage to admit that behind closed doors, perfection was crumbling into dust. And maybe I stayed because I was afraid, afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid that this, flawed and fragile as it was, might be the only love I'd ever know. But deep down, somewhere I tried not to touch, I knew. I knew my fairy tale wasn't a fairy tale at all. It was a stage play, carefully rehearsed, with him as the lead actor and me as the audience member too stubborn to leave, even after the curtain had already fallen. Every time he smiled at me, I wanted to forget. Every time he touched my hand, I convinced myself the magic was still alive. But love built on illusions can't survive forever. Sooner or later, the mask slips. Sooner or later, the truth claws its way into the light. And for me, the truth came crashing down in the most brutal way imaginable. Because while I was about to bring our child into the world, our flesh and blood, our future, he was already gone. Gone to the arms of someone I trusted, someone I never thought would betray me. The man I believed would be my forever wasn't there to hold my hand when I needed him most. He wasn't there to whisper strength into my ear as the pain of labor racked my body. No, he had abandoned me, abandoned us for the one person I never saw coming, my best friend. And that was the moment everything shattered. At first, I convinced myself that every relationship changes with time. The honeymoon phase fades, the butterflies quiet down, and love becomes less about fireworks and more about comfort. That's what I told myself when his hands stopped reaching for mine in the car, when the long evening conversations we used to have turned into silence filled with the glow of his phone screen. But comfort wasn't what I felt. I felt invisible. He started staying late at work, or at least that's what he claimed. Don't wait up for me, he'd text, always with some excuse, a deadline, a meeting, a boss who needed him. And I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because the alternative, the thought that maybe he just didn't want to be with me, was too painful to face. I would set dinner on the table, candles lit just to keep some spark alive, only to watch the food grow cold in front of me. Hours later, he'd stumble in, exhausted, brushing off my questions with a kiss to the top of my head. Not a real kiss, not the kind that makes you feel seen, just emotion and obligation, like checking a box. And then there was his phone, always in his hand, always face down on the table when I walked into the room. Notifications silenced, messages hidden. I'd ask, "Who's that?" And he'd give me that look sharp, irritated, like I was a child tugging on his sleeve. "No one," he'd mutter. "You're paranoid." I told myself not to nag, not to push. I told myself he was tired, that he was under pressure. I even blamed myself. Maybe I'm not exciting enough. Maybe I've let myself go. Maybe this is just what marriage becomes. And then there was Emily, my best friend, my sister by choice. She had been in my life since before him. She knew my secrets, my fears, my dreams. She had been there when I cried over past heartbreaks, the one who told me I deserved better. She was supposed to be my safe place. In the beginning, it felt natural to have her around. She and my husband got along, which made me happy. We'd all laugh together, play games, share meals. I thought we were building something unshakable of friendship that blended seamlessly with love. But slowly, I noticed things. The way her eyes lingered on him a second too long, the way he lit up at her jokes in a way he no longer did with mine. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, because what kind of best friend betrays the woman who trusted her with everything? What kind of husband risks everything for someone else, right in front of his wife? Yet the signs grew louder. She'd call him for advice about things she never mentioned to me. He'd laugh at her stories, his face lighting up in a way that made my stomach twist. And sometimes when I walked into the room, they'd fall silent too quickly, too deliberately. I brushed it off. They're just close. They care about me. They'd never know. They'd never. But deep down, a small voice whispered, that gut instinct we try to ignore when the truth feels too dangerous. And my gut told me something was wrong. I remember one night vividly. We were at dinner, the three of us. Emily told a ridiculous story about something that happened at work, and he laughed a deep belly laugh, the kind I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I sat there, smiling on the outside, but inside I felt like I was vanishing, like the woman at the table was just a shadow, while my husband and my best friend basked in a light that excluded me. And when she leaned over and playfully touched his arm, I felt my chest tighten. Just a friendly touch, I told myself, just a gesture. But the way he didn't move away, the way he smiled at her, it felt like a line being crossed. That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I became an outsider in my own marriage. But when I tried to talk about it, he twisted everything. You're imagining things. Why do you always assume the worst? Do you enjoy creating problems out of nothing? His words sliced through me, leaving me ashamed of my own feelings, so I stayed silent. I learned to swallow my doubts, to shrink myself smaller and smaller just to keep the peace. But silence is poison. It doesn't heal. It festers, it spreads, it corrodes everything it touches. And that's what was happening to Meslowly, quietly. What I didn't know then was that my silence was exactly what he wanted. Because while I was busy doubting myself, while I was questioning my own sanity, he was already betraying me, right under my nose, and soon that betrayal would become impossible to ignore. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would change everything. I thought it would heal. The cracks between us erase the distance, remind us both of why we fell in love in the first place. I can still see it in my memory. Me standing in that bathroom, clutching the little stick in my trembling hands, staring at the word that would change my life forever positive. My heart raced, tears welled in my eyes. But they weren't tears of fear. No, they were tears of joy, of hope. I whispered to myself, "This is it. This will bring us back together. This baby will be the new beginning we both need." I imagined telling him. I imagined him lifting me into his arms, spinning me around, kissing me like he hadn't in months. I imagined him whispering that this was the happiest day of his life. But reality was nothing like that. When I told him, his reaction was so far from what I had dreamed, it broke something inside me. His mouth formed a smile, yes, but it was hollow. His eyes didn't light up, his voice didn't shake with joy. He hugged me, but it was stiff, mechanical, like a performance he wasn't invested in. And then came his words. The very first words out of his mouth when I told him he was going to be a father. A baby will be expensive, that was it. Not beautiful, not a blessing, not our future, just expensive. I tried to laugh it off, tried to pretend I didn't hear the emptiness in his voice. But that night, when the house was quiet, I lay in bed with my hand over my stomach and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. Even if he doesn't see it yet, you are wanted. You are loved. I'll love you enough for both of us." From that day forward, pregnancy became a journey I walked mostly alone. The doctor's appointments? He was always too busy. There was always another meeting, another deadline, another excuse. I'd sit in waiting rooms surrounded by couples' husbands holding hands with their wives, leaning in close as the doctor explained each detail, and I'd feel the empty seat beside me like a knife. The first ultrasound was supposed to be magical. The first time I heard that tiny heartbeat, I thought my own heart would burst. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to that rapid thump, 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 proof of life, proof of hope. And in that moment, I turned to look at the chair next to me, wanting so desperately for him to share that miracle with me. But he wasn't there. That chair was empty, and it stayed empty. Appointment after appointment, milestone after milestone. The first time I felt the baby kick, I grabbed his hand, excited, pressing it against my stomach. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice filled with wonder. He pulled his hand away too quickly. "Yeah, I felt it," he muttered before glancing back down at his phone. His face never changed, not even a flicker of joy. And I sat there, stunned, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. But the loneliness wasn't just in the doctor's offices or the quiet moments at home. It was in the way he looked at me, or rather, didn't. My body was changing, carrying life inside me, and instead of cherishing me, instead of holding me close and telling me I was beautiful, he looked at me with irritation, sometimes even disgust. One night, I stood in front of the mirror, my hands resting on my swollen belly, and I whispered to my reflection, "You are still beautiful. You are still worthy." Because he wasn't saying it. He wasn't making me feel it. And if I didn't tell myself, I was terrified I'd forget. And then there was Emily, my best friend. She was always around. She was the one who texted me reminders to eat, the one who dropped by with soups and teas, the one who sat on my couch and rubbed my back when the morning sickness got too bad. She acted like she was stepping in where he wouldn't, like she was filling the gaps. But there was something strange about her presence now, something I couldn't quite name back then. Her kindness felt rehearsed, too polished, almost like she wanted to be noticed for it. Almost like her concern wasn't really about me at all. It was about keeping a foot in the door of my marriage. The further along I got, the heavier the loneliness grew. Pregnancy is supposed to be a time when you feel cherished, when your partner protects you, when your home becomes a sanctuary for the life you're building together. But instead, my home felt like a prison cell. I carried life inside me while feeling more abandoned than I ever had in my life. At night, I'd lie awake, my hand over my belly, feeling the baby move. And while I should have felt joy, I felt a deep ache, because every kick was a reminder that this child deserved a father who cared, a father who was present. And I didn't know if mine would ever be. Sometimes he didn't even come home at night. He'd stumble in after midnight, his shirt smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He'd shower quickly, slide into bed, and turn away from me before I could ask any questions. And when I did ask, he always had an answer ready. I was working late. The guys went out for a drink. You're imagining things. And I believed him, or maybe I just wanted to, because the truth was too terrifying to face. And yet, in the quiet moments when I pressed my lips against my stomach and whispered to the baby, I confessed the truth I couldn't say out loud. It feels like it's just you and me now. And that's okay. We're going to be okay. I clung to hope. Hope that once the baby arrived, something inside him would shift. Hope that when he held his child for the first time, he'd remember what love really means. Hope that maybe then we'd become a family again. But hope can be cruel. Because the night I went into labor, the night my body was breaking apart to bring life into the world, was the night he abandoned me completely. He didn't just fail me. He didn't just fail our baby. He left me in labor for her, for Emily. The contractions started suddenly gripping me like fire. I called him, expecting him to rush to my side, but instead he walked out of my life, straight into the arms of my best friend. The first contraction took my breath like a fist to the ribs. It started low, then climbed like fire up my spine, sharp enough to make me grip the kitchen counter and whisper, "Please not tonight." But the body has its own clock, and mine had struck now. I called him. He answered on the third ring, voice clipped, the sound of traffic in the background. "What is it?" "I think it's time," I said, trying to breathe the way the nurse taught me. "My contractions, I'm on my way," he cut in. No softness, no panic, just logistics. He did show up. He grabbed the hospital bag, took the keys, and we were in the car. Street lights carved pale lines across my knees as another contraction slammed into me. I pressed my forehead to the cool window and counted. In, out, in, out. His phone lit the car again and again, a little blue square in the dark, and every time it buzzed, he turned the screen away from me. We hit a red light. His phone buzzed. He glanced, thumb hovering. For a fraction of a second, I saw the name, Emily. A clean, simple notification. "Where are you?" My stomach flipped. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was checking on me. I told myself 1,000 gentle lies because the truth felt like it would split me open more than the contractions ever could. Triage was a blur of paper bracelets, blood pressure cuffs, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. The nurse was kind. She had calm hands and a voice like warm tea. "You're at 5 centimeters," she said, and smiled like this was the best news in the world. "We're moving, Mama. You've got this." He stood at the foot of the bed, scrolling, the blue light flickering over his face. The nurse asked him to sign a form. He didn't look up. She had to say his name twice. Another contraction hit. I clenched my jaw and reached for him. He let me hold 2 fingers, not a hand, like I might break his rhythm. When the pain eased, he shook me off gently and stepped back. The phone buzzed again. He flinched like it burned. "I'm going to grab coffee," he said, already turning, "and take a call." "How long?" I asked, too fast, too needy. I heard it in my own voice. 10 minutes, he said without looking at me. 15. The door swung shut behind him. The nurse tightened my IV and smiled at me like she could hold me together with that smile alone. "He'll be right back," she said. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 30. The monitor ticked out my contractions like a metronome. Mountains rising, mountains falling. I stared at the door and pictured him on the phone in the hallway, head bent, one hand in his pocket the way he always stood when he had secrets. I texted him, "Where are you?" No answer. Another wave hit, hotter, meaner. I pressed the call button and the nurse was there with ice chips and encouragement. Slow breathing. "You're doing beautifully." 45 minutes. An hour. My phone buzzed with a bank alert. The street name punched the air out of me. Emily Street. I stared at that tiny sentence until the screen dimmed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My body was already doing both kinds of breaking there are, the quiet kind and the loud kind. The nurse squeezed my shoulder. Want me to call him? She asked. I opened my mouth to say yes, to say please, to say anything. Another contraction stole the words. I nodded instead, small and helpless, like a child. She stepped out with my phone. I watched the door frame and pretended I could hear his voice through it. She came back alone, lips pressed together. It went to voicemail, she said gently. Time stopped making sense. The room pulsed monitors, beeps, murmured codes I didn't understand. I curled on my side and rode the waves, teeth bared, breath an animal thing. When the anesthesiologist finally came, I whispered, "Thank you," like a prayer. The edge softened. The world came back into focus. The empty chair beside my bed did not. Any family we should call? The nurse asked. A mom, a sister, a friend? I almost said Emily. The name caught in my throat like a bone. I shook my head. It's just us. Then it's just us, she said, and tucked a warm blanket around my legs like armor. 2 hours, 3. The doctor checked me and nodded approval. You're strong, she said. Baby's strong too. She asked about a birth plan. I had one. It had his hands in it. It had his voice in it. I watched it slide off the bed and dissolve like spilled water. Between contractions, I drifted, a thin sleep with edges. In one dream, he walked back in with flowers. In another, he didn't walk back at all, and the doorframe stayed a mouth that never swallowed. When the pushing started, the room changed. Lights angled, people moved fast and precise. The nurse planted her feet like a captain in a storm, chin to chest, deep breath. Bear down, she said, and I did because there was no one else to do it for me. I wanted his hand. I wanted his forehead pressed to mine. I wanted the smallest piece of the fairy tale we promised each other. Instead, there were strangers with good hearts and practiced hands, and the steady voice of the nurse counting me through the dark water. You are not alone, she said into my ear. I'm right here. Keep going. Pain split me clean. Then a pressure, a rush, a relief so total I shook with it. A thin cry tore the room, high and perfect. The nurse laughed out loud, the sound bright as sunlight. Listen to that, she said. Your baby has opinions. They placed warm weight on my chest. I looked down and saw a face I already knew. I didn't know the shape of this life yet, but I knew the certainty in my bones. I will never let you feel the kind of alone I felt tonight. I kissed a damp forehead and whispered a promise into brand new hair. The nurse adjusted wires and wiped my cheek. You did that, she said. You did all of that. Someone asked if there was a father they should call. I shook my head, a slow, quiet no, because the word father means presence, and tonight he was an absence with a phone plan. In the after stillness, I checked my messages. Nothing from him. A thread from Emily at 10:47 p.m. Are you with her? Another at 11:05 p.m. Come now. And then a photo in her story, posted after midnight, just a sliver of a glass, a table edge, the cuff of a shirt I knew as well as my own hands. The caption, finally. It took everything I had not to drop my phone on the floor and let it shatter instead of me. The nurse saw my face change. Do you want me to take the baby to the nursery so you can rest? She asked. I pulled my child closer. No, I said. No. He stays. We lay like that for a long time, the room, humming around us, the little breaths of a brand new person counting out the minutes. A text finally came in at 2:14 a.m. How is it going? My phone died. Something in me hardened and cooled, a lake under winter. My phone died. The oldest lie with a fresh coat of paint. I typed, then erased, typed, then erased. In the end, I sent nothing. Silence felt truer. He walked in just before dawn, hair neat, shirt changed, the smell of hotel soap clinging to him. He looked at the baby and arranged his face into tenderness like it was a tie he knew how to knot. Sorry I missed the worst of it, he said softly, as if the sentence could pass for kindness. Work exploded, and Emily, she needed me. Emily needed you, I repeated, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. While I was giving birth to your child. He winced. It's complicated. No, I said. It's not. He reached toward the bassinet. I shifted, just enough that his hand stalled midair. The nurse appeared like a guardian, checked my vitals, checked his distance, and handed me a glass of water I didn't know I needed. He stayed 8 minutes. He told a story about a client that had too many convenient holes. He touched nothing. He said we'd talk when it had sleep, like the problem here was exhaustion and not an earthquake. When he left, the air grew warmer, as if the room could finally breathe. The sun found the blinds and drew gold lines across the floor. My phone buzzed again. Another bank alert. Hotel charge authorized, 12:38 a.m. I didn't need the address to know the truth. Betrayal doesn't require proof to exist. Proof is for courtrooms. Betrayal is for nights like this. I looked down at my Sun Me miracle, my anchor, and felt the last part of the spell break. The story I'd been clinging to about us, about him, about love crumbled in my hands like old paper. And under it, something stronger waited. Not rage, not yet. Not revenge, not yet. Just a clean, solid decision. Never again will I beg someone to stay. I pressed my lips to my baby's forehead and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the world had edges again. The pain was still there, the humiliation fresh and raw, but the center of me had shifted. I wasn't just a woman someone left. I was a mother someone couldn't break. The nurse came back with new blankets and a smile that made me feel seen. "How are we doing?" "We're okay," I said, and realized I meant it. We're going to be okay. I didn't know about the documents I would soon find, the messages I would uncover, the map of lies it would trace from his phone to hers and back again. I didn't know about the lawyer who would say the word fraud out loud, or the judge who would look over her glasses at a man who thought charm could erase evidence. I just knew this. He left me in labor for my best friend, and I was done pretending that was anything but exactly what it was. The proof arrived faster than I expected, screenshots, receipts, and a truth so shameless, it took my breath more than any contraction. And once I saw it all laid out, there was no going back. The morning after labor, the world outside my hospital window looked so ordinary. Cars passed, people walked by, the sun rose as if nothing in my life had changed. But inside that room, my world was unrecognizable. My body was sore, my heart was bruised, and the man who was supposed to love me was already slipping through my fingers. He came and went like a stranger. His visits were short, rehearsed, almost transactional. He'd bring a cup of coffee I didn't ask for, set it on the tray, and check his phone more than he checked on me. Every time the door shut behind him, I stared at the handle, waiting for him to come back quickly. But he never did. The first piece of proof revealed itself by accident. He left his jacket slung over the hospital chair, and when I shifted to grab a tissue, a folded slip of paper tumbled to the floor. I bent down, picked it up, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw what it was. A receipt. A hotel receipt. The timestamp was from the exact night I was admitted. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reread the words, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the letters and numbers stayed the same, steady and merciless. He wasn't out grabbing coffee. He wasn't pacing the halls, taking a business call. He was at a hotel. Later that day, he walked back in with flowers. Not roses, not anything thoughtful, just the kind of bouquet a man grabs out of obligation at the nearest grocery store. I stared at him as he placed them by the bed, waiting for his eyes to meet mine, waiting for a flicker of honesty. But he never looked at me. He kissed my forehead mechanically and whispered, "You look tired. Get some rest." Those words broke me in a different way. He was talking to me like I was fragile glass, like my exhaustion would stop me from seeing the truth he was hiding in plain sight. That night, when the baby was finally asleep and the room was quiet, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I opened Emily's social media. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe reassurance, maybe something to quiet the gnawing in my stomach. But instead, what I found sliced through me like a blade. A story she had posted at midnight, a champagne glass, a table corner, and there it was, the unmistakable cufflink, his cufflink. The caption was one word, just one. Finally, my chest tightened, my throat closing as if the walls of the hospital were crushing me. I replayed the story again and again, convincing myself I must be wrong. That couldn't be his cufflink. That couldn't be his shirt sleeve. But denial only works when you don't already know the truth. And deep down, I knew. When he came back the next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. My voice trembled, but the words clawed their way out. "Where were you last night?" He blinked, a master actor pretending confusion. "What do you mean? I told you work exploded." My phone. Don't, I snapped louder than I meant to. The baby stirred in the bassinet, but I couldn't stop. Don't you dare stand here and lie to me again. You weren't at work. You weren't even here. You were with her, with Emily. For the first time, his mask slipped. A flicker of something, guilt, shock, maybe fear flashed across his face. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced with that cool, dismissive calm he always wore when he wanted to control me. You're imagining things, he said smoothly. Emily's just a friend. You're hormonal. You just gave birth. You're not thinking clearly. Gaslighting. That was his weapon. Twist the truth until I questioned myself. Until I believed him more than I believed my own eyes. But not this time, not after the receipt, not after the photo, not after the word finally. I had proof, and I had enough. I stared at him, and for the first time in years I didn't shrink. I didn't doubt myself. Stop lying, I whispered. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, unshakable. I know. I know where you were, I know who you were with, and I know what you've done. The silence stretched between us. I could see him weighing his options, another lie, another excuse, another attempt to twist me into silence. But then, with a sigh so casual it felt like another slap, he finally dropped the pretense. She understands me better than you ever did. That's what he said, just like that. Cold, dismissive. As if years of love, vows, promises, and the baby sleeping beside me were nothing. As if I was nothing. Something inside me collapsed. But at the same time, something else began to rise. Betrayal can burn you down to ash, yes, but sometimes from the ash, something harder, sharper, and stronger begins to take form. I looked at him through tears that refused to fall. Then you deserve each other, I said. My voice cracked, but the truth was solid beneath it. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and left the room. The door shut behind him, and for the first time, I didn't pray for him to come back. Because I knew that he had chosen her. I knew that he had abandoned me in the most vulnerable moment of my life. But what he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I wasn't as powerless as they thought. Because hidden beneath all the pain and humiliation was a secret my father had left me, a secret worth $300 million. And soon I would uncover it. I walked out of Margaret's office that day with my baby on one hip and the folder clutched to my chest, and I swear the air around me felt different. The same streets I had driven down 1,000 times now seemed sharper, clearer, as if I was finally seeing the world without the haze of his lies clouding my vision. He thought he had broken me, but really he had just woken me up. My father's words echoed in my mind with every step I took. He had built this fortress for me, piece by piece, brick by brick, and now it was mine to stand on. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the baby had fallen asleep, spreading the papers across the wood surface, running my fingers over each page as if touching them could make the reality sink in deeper. $300 million. It didn't feel real. My husband used to laugh at me whenever I mentioned my father's land. Just dirt, he'd sneer, as if I were clinging to something worthless. He had no idea that beneath that dirt ran veins of wealth, resources that would outlast him, outlast me, maybe even outlast generations. He mocked it, just as he mocked me. And now that very thing he dismissed was the shield that would save me. But knowing the truth and using it were two very different things. Margaret had been clear. This wasn't about flashing money around or letting him know I had it. No, the power of the secret was in the timing, in the reveal. If I played this right, his arrogance would be his downfall. If I played it wrong, he might find a way to weasel into what was mine. So I bit down on my pride, tucked the folder away, and let him believe I was still the broken woman he had abandoned. Days turned into weeks, and the divorce proceedings began. Walking into that courtroom for the first time, I felt the weight of every eye on me. He sat there across the aisle, polished as always in his expensive suit, smirking like the cat that had already eaten the bird. Beside him, my so-called best friend sat with her chin tilted high, wearing the same perfume she used to spritz on in my bathroom before we went out together. The betrayal burned fresh in my chest, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Not anymore. He leaned back in his chair when he saw me, that smug look plastered across his face as if to say, "You're nothing without me." And maybe once I had believed that. Maybe once I had even lived like it was true. But not anymore. The judge's voice droned on, the formalities dragging like weights through water, but I barely heard them. I was waiting. Waiting for Margaret to stand. Waiting for the moment when the truth would come crashing down like a thunderclap. And then it came. Margaret rose, calm and steady, the way only a woman who knows she holds the winning hand can rise. She laid out the story piece by piece, exposing his lies, his deceit, his financial manipulation. She painted him for what he was, a man who abandoned his wife in labor for another woman while secretly siphoning money and preparing to leave me with nothing. His smirk faltered. He shifted in his chair, the first crack in his mask. But that wasn't the end. Margaret wasn't just dismantling him. She was building me. Brick by brick, she laid out my father's plan, the trusts, the land, the resources. The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers, grew so silent I could hear the scratch of her pen against the notepad as she underlined one final figure. $300 million. The number hung in the air like lightning frozen mid-strike. I'll never forget his face in that moment. The way his mouth fell open, just slightly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. The way his eyes darted to me, searching for confirmation, as if maybe this was a nightmare he could still wake from. But I met his stare and didn't look away. Not once. For the first time in years, I wasn't the woman shrinking under his shadow. I was the storm standing in his path. My best friend, no. The woman who used to be my best friend shifted uncomfortably beside him. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear, but his hand shot up to silence her. He couldn't hear her now. He couldn't hear anyone. He was too busy watching the empire he thought he had stolen collapse into dust around him. By the time Margaret finished, there was nothing left for him to say. The prenup he had bragged about, the one he thought would leave me stripped and begging, was void. His schemes, his betrayal, his arrogance, they had all turned to ash. And me? I wasn't just free. I was untouchable. As I walked out of that courtroom, the sun hit my face the way it had the day I discovered the folder. Warm, steady, unshakable. He had left me in labor for my best friend, thinking I was nothing, but what he didn't know was that I was worth $300 million, and that was the difference between me breaking and me rising. When the gavel struck, it wasn't just wood against wood, it was the sound of an empire collapsing. His empire, the one he had built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal. The courtroom fell into silence, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe but suffocates. I could hear his breathing, shallow, erratic as. The judge's words echoed in the air like a sentence carved into stone. The prenup, void, his claims, rejected, his schemes, exposed. Everything he thought he had secured for himself slipped through his fingers like sand in an hourglass. For a moment, he didn't move. He sat there frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between the judge, the lawyers, and me. He looked like a man watching his reflection shatter in slow motion. I stood tall, my hands no longer trembling, my voice no longer silenced. This was not the woman he left in a hospital bed, crying out in pain and humiliation. This was not the woman who begged for scraps of love. No, this was a woman reborn in fire, a woman who now carried the weight of $300 million and the legacy of a father who had known exactly what kind of protection his daughter would one day need. As I walked past him, the room seemed to shrink around him. He tried to speak, his lips parting as if to call my name, but no sound came out. For once his voice, the same voice that had once pierced me with cruel jokes and hollow promises, meant nothing. He was voiceless in the very space where he once believed he controlled everything. And I wanted him to feel that silence, to choke on it the way I had once choked on my own tears. Outside, the world was waiting. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, strangers craned their necks to see me, but all I felt was the air, sharp and cold against my skin, as if the universe itself had opened a door just for me. I was no longer stepping out as his wife. I was no longer stepping out as the abandoned woman. I was stepping out as myself, whole, unbroken, unstoppable. Later that night, when the chaos had faded into quiet, I sat alone in my home, the documents spread out before me. But this time, They didn't feel like heavy secrets. They weren't chains keeping me tied to fear. They were proof that my father had loved me beyond measure, proof that betrayal does not define the betrayed, proof that strength can grow in the most broken places. I thought about him again, Marcus, the man who left me in labor, who walked away from my best friend, believing he was trading up, believing he had won. And now he was left with nothing but the ashes of his greed and the ruins of his pride. The woman he chose over me was nowhere in sight, already backing away from the sinking ship he had turned into. Even she saw him for what he truly was, a man who thought money made him powerful, only to discover that real power had been sitting across from him all along. I raised my glass of wine, the baby monitor glowing softly on the counter beside me. My daughter's gentle breathing hummed through the speaker, steady and reassuring. That sound was worth more than any fortune. That sound was my true wealth. But still, I smiled, because now the world knew what he never had the patience to discover, that I wasn't just a woman he could discard. I was a woman worth $300 million, a woman whose worth could never be measured in betrayal, but in survival, in strength, in the fire that no one could put out. And in that moment, I knew I had the final word. He had written me off as powerless. He had left me broken in a hospital bed. He had chosen betrayal over loyalty. But when the curtain closed on our story, I was the one standing in the spotlight while he was left in the shadows, a spectator in the downfall of his own kingdom. The night after the courtroom battle ended, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud. I sat at the dining table with a small wooden box in front of me, my father's handwriting carved across the lid. I had avoided opening it until now, afraid of what emotions it might stir. But something in me knew the time had come. I traced my fingers across the letters of his name, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded the paper, my hands trembling, not from weakness anymore, but from the gravity of knowing that his voice was about to reach me again. "My Sarah," it began. Just 2 words, but they broke me open. Tears filled my eyes as I read. He wrote about foresight, about how people will smile at you with love in their mouths but knives behind their backs, about how a father cannot always protect his daughter by standing beside her, but he can protect her by building a fortress she doesn't even know she lives in until the walls are tested. He wrote about worth, about value, about never letting anyone convince me that I was small. And then came the part that made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. "The land I leave to you will one day mean more than either of us can imagine. Guard it, respect it, but above all, let it remind you that you are never without power. Even if the world betrays you, you will never be without a foundation to stand on." The tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of vindication, of gratitude, of love that even death could not silence. My father had seen the storm before it came. He had known somehow that I would face betrayal and abandonment, and he had made sure I would never truly be powerless. I leaned back in my chair, the letter pressed against my chest, and thought about Marcus, the man who thought he was clever, who believed he had outplayed me, who abandoned me in the most vulnerable moment of my life. He had chosen to run toward lust and greed, not realizing he was running away from the one thing he could never buy: true wealth. He thought he left me with nothing, but the truth was he left me with everything. He simply didn't know it. And my so-called best friend? She had vanished like smoke the moment his empire collapsed. Her loyalty was as fragile as the lies they built together. I had once cried over losing her, over the betrayal of a friendship I thought was unbreakable. But now I pitied her, because she had tied herself to a sinking ship, and when the waters rose, she jumped, leaving him to drown alone. As I held my father's letter, the contrast became clear. Marcus had abandoned me while I was giving life, and my best friend had betrayed me while pretending to share life with me. But my father, he had given me a life raft before I even knew I'd need one. That was love. That was protection. That was foresight. I stood and walked to the nursery, the soft glow of the nightlight spilling across the room. My daughter lay in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with each steady breath. I leaned against the doorway, watching her, my heart swelling with something greater than relief. She was the reason I had fought. She was the reason I had stood tall, even when the ground beneath me shook. And she was the reason I would never again allow anyone to make me feel small. I whispered softly, "You'll never have to doubt your worth, not while I'm here." As I turned away, I realized the real fortune wasn't just the $300 million. It wasn't even the land or the gas deposits or the trust fund. The real fortune was standing here, whole, with the wisdom of my father behind me and the future of my daughter ahead of me. But still, I couldn't help but let a smile curve across my lips, because Marcus would never recover from this. He would live the rest of his life knowing that the woman he discarded, the woman he mocked and underestimated, was worth more than he could ever dream of. He left me in labor for my best friend, thinking he had won, but in truth, he had already lost. And me? I had won everything. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the box, and closed the lid. The weight of it felt different now, not heavy, but grounding, a reminder of where I came from, of what I had survived, of what I would build next. The chapter of Marcus was over. The chapter of betrayal was closed. The only story left to write was mine, and it began with this truth. He left me in labor for my best friend, not knowing I was worth $300 million. In the quiet that followed the verdict, the world tried to hand me a script I refused to read. People wanted gossip to fill the spaces where my pain had lived. Neighbors who once waved from their porches leaned a little farther over their fences. Old acquaintances sent messages that began with just checking on you and ended with questions they had no right to ask. I learned to let my phone ring. I learned that silence can be a boundary as firm as a locked door. He wasn't silent. He flooded every channel he could find, texts, emails, voicemails that overran the storage on my phone until the notifications stacked like bricks across the screen. They came in waves: denial, anger, bargaining, nostalgia. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You're punishing me for one mistake. Remember our first date? Think about our family." He tossed every line he'd ever used to make me stay into the air, hoping one would land like a hook in my heart. But I had finally learned to keep my heart out of reach. When he realized his words weren't working, he tried appearances. He showed up on my doorstep with a bouquet so bright it hurt to look at, the cellophane crackling like static. I opened the door only as wide as the chain would allow and stood still while he arranged his face into sincerity. "I'm not the man you think I am," he said, voice low, eyes searching. I let the sentence hang between us, and with it, the memory of the hospital room me hand reaching for a hand that never came. "No," I said quietly. "You're exactly the man I know you are." His jaw tightened. The flowers drooped between us like a tired apology. I didn't unhook the chain. He didn't step inside. Emily tried a different tactic. She mailed a package, a scarf I'd once lent her, a book she'd borrowed forever, a note that said, in careful handwriting, if I could undo it, I would. I held the scarf and thought of the night she'd wrapped it around her neck in my hallway mirror while telling me I deserved the kind of love that never makes you doubt. I slid the box back across the counter, taped it shut, and wrote, "Return to sender" on the label. Some things don't belong in my house anymore. Some things never did. There were practical battles to fight, the kind that don't make good stories but save lives from chaos. Margaret moved through them like a surgeon, precise, unhurried, unafraid. Custody terms were set like anchors: safety first, routine second, emotion managed by the facts. Supervised visits until trust could be proven, therapy mandated, schedules that protected naps and feedings, and the small sacred rituals that steady a baby's world. He protested, then postured, then signed. Paper can't fix a person, but it can protect a child from their storms. I took back my spaces one drawer at a time. The nightstand that once held his watch and loose change now held a baby monitor, a pen, and the letter from my father folded to a soft crease. I moved the bed away from the window because morning light no longer felt like a spotlight I owed anyone. I painted a wall. Not because I needed a new color, but because I needed to watch old paint disappear under something I chose. The room smelled like clean beginnings for days. I drove out to my father's land on a weekday morning when the sky was the color of a promise, clear and endless. The gate creaked when I pushed it, the grasses bowing and rising as I walked, as if the earth were breathing with me. I stood on a ridge and closed my eyes until the wind threaded through my hair and the weight of his foresight pressed warm against my back. I didn't feel rich out there. I felt rooted. The numbers only mean something if the ground means something first. I promised him I'd be a good steward, that it'd build things that outlast us, that it'd spend my fortune like a thank you note to every hand that ever held mine when I was falling. The internet tried to spin its own web anonymous accounts posting half truths, a podcast episode that treated my life like a plot twist. Margaret sent one letter on firm letterhead, and the noise softened to a murmur. It turns out lies wilt under the kind of light you can measure in exhibits and sworn statements. I didn't chase a single rumor. I was too busy making breakfasts and remembering the sound of my own laugh. I learned joy in small increments again. The first time my daughter slept 5 hours in a row, I woke up in a panic, then lay there grinning into the dark like a fool. The first time I took her to the park and she reached for the sunlight like it was a toy, I cried without apology. I stopped trying to fill every minute with reason and let some minutes be ordinary. Healing hides in ordinary minutes. He tried one last spectacle of public apology in a place where he knew cameras linger. He waited outside the cafe where I sometimes stopped for a cinnamon roll after the pediatrician. He stepped into my path with a practiced softness and a speech about redemption that tasted like something he'd rehearsed in a mirror. People turned, phones lifted, the air went tight. I shifted my daughter higher on my hip, felt the heat of her cheek through the cotton, and said evenly, "You left me in labor." There is no sentence after that. It wasn't dramatic. It was true. He opened and closed his mouth twice, then stepped back. The crowd exhaled. I bought my cinnamon roll and left him with his performance. The money didn't turn me into a different person. It turned me into more of who I already was. I set up a fund for the maternity ward where a nurse had held my gaze and said, "You are not alone." I wrote checks to legal clinics that protect women who can't afford a Margaret. I paid for cribs at shelters, for car seats, for night lights and noise machines, and all the tiny anchors that help exhausted parents feel like they can make it to morning. And I did it without press releases. Loud generosity is fine. Quiet generosity is mine. Sometimes late when the house rests and the baby's soft breath becomes the only clock I care about, I take out my father's letter again and trace the groove of each sentence. He didn't just give me a fortune, he gave me a map. He drew an X where my strength lives and dared me to find it. I did. The treasure wasn't buried. It was beating in my chest the whole time. There's a myth that revenge is the sweetest dish. I don't think so. Relief is sweeter. Peace is sweeter. A Tuesday that tastes like nothing special is the feast I craved and forgot to name. Still, I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a clean satisfaction when I hear from someone who heard from someone that he is quieter now, that rooms don't lean toward him anymore, that the mirror has become a place he avoids. Consequence is not the same as revenge. Consequence simply arrives when invitation runs out. I kept my wedding album in a box for a while. Not because I wanted to look at it, but because throwing it away felt like lying about the fact that I loved once with my whole unprepared heart. One afternoon, I slid the photos into an envelope and labeled it with a single word, before. I put it on a high shelf. I didn't need to burn the past to keep it from burning me. I just needed to shelve it where it couldn't fall on my head every time I opened the closet. On a bright morning thick with birdsong, my daughter took 3 wobbly steps from the couch to my knees and fell against me laughing, her hands open and unafraid. I caught her, of course. That's what I do now. That's what I will always do. In that instant, every number, every headline, every whisper dissolved into something the size of her fist and the weight of her trust. $300 million cannot buy that sound. It can only make sure no one ever takes it from us. People ask, when they're brave enough, if I would change anything. I used to say yes. Now I say no, not because the pain was necessary or noble, but because it revealed the truth I might have never dared to see. My worth has never been something anyone else could hold or drop. He didn't leave with it. She didn't steal it. It was here, waiting for me to stop asking for permission and start building a life that fits. I lock the front door at night and feel the house settle around us like a promise kept. I leave the porch light on for no one. I fall asleep before the end of movies. I wake up to small feet and big mornings. The storm passed. The ground dried. The garden needed weeding. I put my hands in the soil and it felt like an oath. And then, because endings have a way of circling back to the beginning, there came a letter addressed in his handwriting, a final attempt, a last thread he hoped might tug me toward the past. I set it on the counter, made breakfast, buckled shoes, wiped yogurt from a joyful chin, and only then opened it. It was 3 paragraphs long and said everything except I was wrong. It asked for coffee, for closure, for a version of forgiveness that looks like a shortcut. I stood very still and let the words slide off me like rain off a roof that doesn't leak anymore. I folded the paper once, then again, and tucked it into an envelope labeled no. Some doors don't need to slam, they just need to stay closed. There are nights when the wind pushes at the windows, and for a heartbeat, I am back in the hospital, back in the space between a contraction and a truth I didn't want. Then my daughter turns in her sleep and sighs, and the house exhales with her. The past is a loud room behind a thick wall. It can make noise all at once. We're busy living. He left me in labor. He left me for my best friend. He left because he thought there was nothing here worth staying for. He never knew that under this roof, under this skin, under my father's quiet plans, there was a kingdom he could never own. The papers were signed, the gavel fell, the cameras blinked and forgot. But the real ending looks like this: a woman standing at her sink at dusk, rinsing strawberries for tomorrow's lunch, humming along to a song she thought she'd forgotten, rich in every way that matters and a few ways that don't hurt either, certain at last that she will never again mistake crumbs for a meal. And because stories like mine don't end with a curtain call but with a choice, here is mine. I choose the life he tried to keep small. I choose the voice he tried to quiet. I choose the legacy my father laid under my feet. I choose the light left on for us, not for anyone else. I choose forward. Seamless as breath, the truth keeps returning to its simplest form. He left me in labor for my best friend, never knowing I was worth $300 million, and the only thing he took with him was the chance to stand beside a woman who finally knows exactly what she's worth. The final blow didn't come with shouting or with some courtroom twist, but in the quiet way the truth finally sank in for him, for her, for everyone who doubted me. By then, the empire my father left me had already begun to unfold in ways he never could have imagined. The trust fund, the properties, the companies, the investments, it all came under my name, and every headline carried a weight that turned whispers into shockwaves. People who had once pitied me now looked at me like a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding gold. But what they didn't understand was that the money wasn't the treasure. The treasure was me finally knowing my worth. When the story broke his betrayal, my fortune, the irony of it all, I didn't even have to say a word. The world said it for me. Strangers who had never met me saw the headlines and gasped. How could he? How could a man abandon his wife in labor for a fleeting affair, blind to the fact that she was the heir to a fortune that could have changed his life forever? The question wasn't mine to answer anymore. It was his burden to carry. And oh, how heavy it must have felt. He tried to reach me, of course. He wrote letters full of regret, as if ink could erase the night I lay in that hospital bed reaching for someone who never came. He begged for forgiveness, for just one meeting, one conversation where he could explain. But what is there to explain about a choice so deliberate, so cruel? You don't walk away from the mother of your child in her most vulnerable hour and expect words to patch the wound. You don't betray not only your vows, but your humanity, and then ask for coffee to make it better. I didn't need his closure. My closure was in the silence that followed every time I refused to answer. Emily didn't fare much better. The so-called best friend who smiled in my kitchen, who whispered secrets into my ear, had been reduced to nothing more than a shadow. Her texts were pitiful attempts at reclaiming dignity, masked apologies mixed with excuses. I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought he loved me. Can we at least talk? No, we could not, because friendship, like love is measured in the moments you show up. And she hadn't shown up when I needed her most. That truth could not be undone, no matter how many times she said she was sorry. But the real justice, the kind that doesn't need a gavel or a lawyer, was watching them both shrink in the face of my rising. Every event I attended, every article that praised my resilience, every project I launched with the wealth they didn't even know existed, it was all a mirror reflecting back the truth they had tried to bury. He left thinking he was walking toward love. She betrayed thinking she was winning something valuable, but they had both bet against me, and they had both lost everything. And me? I was free, free to raise my child without the poison of their lies, free to build a life not on someone else's approval, but on my own power, free to take the fortune my father had left me and turn it into something meaningful, something that could change lives beyond mine. I funded charities for single mothers. I opened shelters. I gave scholarships to women whose only crime was trusting the wrong man. Every dollar became a stone in the foundation of a legacy they could never touch. Sometimes, late at night, I still remember that hospital room. The pain, the fear, the emptiness of a chair that stayed cold while I fought to bring life into the world. But then I look at my daughter, her tiny hand curled around mine, and I realize that night was not the end of me, it was the beginning. It was the fire that forged me into something unbreakable. And in a strange, twisted way, I thank him for leaving, because had he stayed, I might never have discovered the truth of who I am. He left me in labor for my best friend. He left thinking I had nothing, that I was no one, that I was disposable. What he didn't know was that I was worth $300 million, not just in money, but in strength, in legacy, in love, in every priceless thing he could never measure. And when the world found out, it wasn't just his shame that echoed, it was my triumph. That's the ending he never saw coming.